Snow hissed against the leaded windows of the Chalet Edelweiss, high in the Bernese Oberland. Outside, the blizzard devoured the world. Inside, 5 guests and 1 corpse. Dr. Elias Varnholt sat bolt upright in the carved walnut chair, eyes wide, lips blue, a perfect rime of frost upon his beard. Yet the French windows were locked from within, the hearth still warm, and the snow around the chalet lay virgin, save for the single set of footprints that began at the balcony and ended at the body. Hercule Poirot, moustaches bristling like twin icicles, murmured, "Mon Dieu, the impossible has occurred, again." Chapter 1. The Frozen Smile. Snow lashed the chalet like 1,000 white knives, each gust a shriek against the timbered walls of Chalet Edelweiss. The great hall, lit only by the dying embers of a pine log fire, and the occasional flare of lightning through the leaded windows, felt less like a refuge than a mausoleum. The storm had begun at dusk, sealing the mountain pass with drifts higher than a man's head. And now, at 3 o'clock in the morning of Christmas Day 1935, it showed no mercy. The guests, 5 souls trapped by weather and circumstance, stood in a loose semicircle around the walnut chair that dominated the Persian rug like a throne. Upon it sat Dr. Elias Varnholt, bolt upright, his head tilted slightly to the left, as though listening to music only he could hear. His eyes, wide and glassy, reflected the firelight in twin pinpricks of gold. A delicate lattice of frost glittered on his beard and lashes. His lips, parted in a smile that revealed nothing, were the pale blue of glacier ice. The room smelled of pine resin, brandy, and something metallic, blood perhaps, though no wound was visible. Hercule Poirot, small and immaculate despite the hour and the altitude, knelt beside the corpse with the reverence of a priest at an altar. His patent leather shoes gleamed even in the half-light, and his fur-lined overcoat, borrowed from the cloakroom, hung open to reveal the inevitable perfection of his suit. He wore no hat. His egg-shaped head, with its parted black hair and magnificent moustache waxed to symmetrical points, seemed almost indecently alive beside the rigid stillness of the dead man. With gloved fingers he touched the doctor's cheek, then the wrist, then the carotid artery beneath the starched collar. The skin was cold, but not yet the cold of the grave. It was the cold of a man who had stepped outside without his coat and paid the ultimate price. "Rigor mortis has not begun," Poirot announced, his voice soft yet carrying to every corner of the room with the clarity of a bell. Death occurred within the last hour, perhaps 45 minutes. The heart ceased while the body retained its warmth. Then the frost preserved it like a specimen in a jar. Madame Clotilde Desmarais, whose Parisian gowns had graced the pages of Vogue, and whose fortune had been built on the indiscretions of others, pressed a lace handkerchief to her lips. The sable collar of her dressing gown trembled with each shuddering breath. "But we were all at table," she whispered, her voice husky from cigarettes and secrets. "All of us, except the doctor. He said he felt a chill and would join us presently." Captain Roderick Blake, Rory to his regiment, though no regiment would claim him now, snorted, a sound like gravel under boot. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, with a sunburned face that had not faded despite years away from the northwest frontier. His dinner jacket strained at the seams. The knot of his black tie had come undone, hanging like a noose. "Needed air," he said. "More likely needed another brandy. The man drank like a fish and bled us like a leech." Fräulein Liesel Obermeier, Varnholt's nurse and constant shadow, stood apart from the others, her starched apron luminous in the firelight. She was young, 25 perhaps, and pretty in the way of Alpine postcards. Flaxen hair braided tight, eyes the colour of edelweiss petals, skin pale from too many nights in sick rooms. She wept without sound, tears sliding down cheeks that had known little sun. Her hands clasped before her were red and raw from scrubbing. The knuckles bore the faint scars of old restraints. She said nothing, but her gaze never left the doctor's face, as though waiting for him to blink. Herr Gustav Keller, the Swiss banker whose ledgers balanced the fortunes of half of Europe, adjusted his pince-nez with fingers that betrayed no tremor. He was a small man, precise, with a beard trimmed to a perfect point, and a waistcoat of charcoal silk that caught the light like oil. His eyes behind the thick lenses were the pale grey of a winter sky. He stared not at the body, but at the French windows that opened onto the balcony. The only windows in the room, and the only ones locked from within. The key lay on the desk beside an open dossier, its pages fluttering in the draught like trapped birds. Poirot rose, brushing imaginary dust from his knees. "The room is locked, yes? Bolted from the inside, the key upon the desk. The fire burns low but steady, enough to keep the chill at bay for one who remained within. Yet Dr. Varnholt is dressed for the outdoors. Overcoat, scarf, gloves, curious." He turned to the company, his green eyes bright as absinthe. "And the snow outside. Tell me, mes amis, what do you see?" Blake crossed to the windows in 2 strides and flung them open. A blast of Arctic air swept in, snuffing candles and sending the fire into a brief furious dance. Snow swirled across the threshold, erasing the pattern of the rug in seconds. Beyond the balcony railing, the world was white and featureless, a void broken only by the single set of footprints that began at the balustrade, and marched, straight, deliberate, unhurried, across the terrace to the exact spot where the body had been found. They were narrow prints, elegant, the heel of a woman's boot worn slightly on the outer edge. 10 feet from the chair they stopped abruptly, swallowed by untouched snow. No return prints, no disturbance, nothing. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, stepping onto the balcony. The cold bit through his coat, but he did not flinch. He knelt again, this time in the snow, and measured the prints with a silk tape he produced from his pocket. "Size 5, Parisian last, Fräulein Obermeier. I believe these are your boots, no?" Liesel started as though struck. I was in the kitchen. The cook will tell you. I was icing the bûche de Noël until 2 o'clock. The cook, a stout Bernese woman named Greta, nodded vigorously from the doorway, where she hovered with a tray of untouched coffee. "Ja, Herr Poirot, the Fräulein never left my sight." Poirot's smile was gentle, almost paternal. "Yet the prints are fresh. The snow has not filled them. They were made after the storm intensified, after midnight, certainly." He traced the edge of one print with a gloved finger, and observe, the stride is even, the weight balanced, no hesitation, no stumble. Whoever walked here knew exactly where they were going. Madame Desmarais swayed, clutching the back of a chair. "Then it is impossible. The doctor was alive at 11:30. I saw him myself in the study, reading his wretched files." He smiled at me, that same smile. She gestured toward the corpse, her rings flashing. "He said, 'Madame, your secrets are safe with me for a price. I paid him last night, in cash, 50,000 francs. Keller cleared his throat. "I paid as well, in gold sovereigns. He kept them in the safe behind the Rembrandt etching." His gaze flicked to the wall, where the painting hung slightly askew. "The combination is 19 to 12:35, today's date." He thought it amusing. Blake laughed, a bitter sound. Amusing. The man had a sense of humour, like a hangman's. He had something on all of us. Me, he knew about Peshawar. The opium, The court-martial they hushed up. His hands clenched into fists. I argued with him at 11. Told him I'd see him in hell before I paid another penny. He just smiled and said, "Captain, hell is already booked in your name." Poirot listened, head cocked like a bird. The wind howled through the open windows, and somewhere in the eaves a shutter banged like a gunshot. He closed the windows with care, latching them securely, then turned to the desk. The dossier lay open to a page headed Desmarais, Clotilde. The handwriting was spidery, precise. Subject exhibits pathological vanity. Will pay any price to conceal juvenile indiscretion in Lyon 1919. Shoplifting turned legend. The stolen necklace now the centerpiece of her winter collection. A photograph was clipped to the page. A girl of 16, defiant, holding a diamond choker that glittered like frost. Madame Desmarais gasped. "He promised confidentiality." "Promises," Poirot said, softly, "are like snowflakes. Beautiful, but they melt under pressure." He turned the page. Another dossier. Blake, Roderick. A faded military report, stamped dishonorable. Keller, Gustav. A ledger page showing transfers from crashed banks in Vienna, 1929. And a fourth, torn at the spine, the remaining stub labelled simply O. Liesel's breath hitched. She took a step back, her apron rustling like dry leaves. "He treated me for nightmares," she whispered. "Said I walked in my sleep, that I was dangerous." Poirot's gaze softened. "And did you, ma petite, walk in your sleep?" She shook her head, but her eyes were wide, pupils dilated. "Not since the asylum. He cured me. He said so." The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Outside, the storm redoubled, rattling the windows in their frames. Poirot moved to the hearth, warming his hands. The reflection of the flames danced in his eyes, turning them into twin furnaces. "Let us reconstruct, then. At 11:30, Dr. Varnholt is alive, reading his files. At 3 o'clock, he is dead frozen, with footprints that lead from the balcony to this chair, and then, vanish. The room is locked, the key is inside, the fire burns. Yet the doctor is dressed for the blizzard, and the snow outside is virgin, save for those impossible prints." He turned suddenly, pointing at the balcony. "The railing, observe the scratches, fresh, made by fingernails, not ice. Someone climbed, or was dragged." He crossed to the French windows again, examining the latch. A shred of white silk caught on the brass, no larger than a moth's wing. He plucked it free, holding it to the light. "From a sheet, perhaps, or a nightgown. Silk is strong, yes? It does not tear easily." Blake muttered, "Ghosts don't need sheets." Poirot's smile was sharp. "Precisely, mon capitaine, which is why our ghost is very much alive, and very clever." The clock struck the quarter hour. In the silence that followed, the chalet seemed to hold its breath. Snow piled against the windows, erasing the world outside. Inside, 5 people and 1 corpse waited for the little Belgian to speak again. But Poirot only twirled his moustache, his mind racing through the corridors of possibility, the footprints, the locked room, the smile frozen on a dead man's face. Somewhere in the blizzard, a killer walked free, wearing, perhaps, the very boots that had left their mark in the snow. And Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells working at full steam, was determined to follow. Chapter 2. The Locked Sanctuary. Poirot closed the French windows with a decisive click, shutting out the howl of the storm as though sealing a tomb. The shred of white silk disappeared into his waistcoat pocket like a conjurer's secret. He turned the key in the lock, tested it, then placed the key upon the desk beside the open dossier. The room felt smaller now, the air thick with the scent of beeswax, brandy, and the faint, sweet rot of fear. "Bon," he said, rubbing his hands together. "We begin with the scene of the crime. The study, Dr. Varnholt's sanctuary, yes? No one enters without invitation. Yet here he died, and here the impossible occurred. The study adjoined the great hall through a heavy oak door, its panels carved with edelweiss and ibex. Poirot pushed it open. The hinges sighed like an old confession. Inside, the room was a shrine to the doctor's ego. Walls lined with leather-bound volumes of Freud, Jung, and Bleuler. A bronze bust of Hippocrates glowering from the mantel. A Persian rug so thick one's feet sank to the ankle. The desk, a vast slab of walnut, dominated the centre, its surface cluttered with crystal inkwells, a silver cigarette box, and the dossiers that had become the currency of terror. Poirot moved with the precision of a watchmaker. He examined the door first. The bolt was thrown from the inside, the wood unmarked by force. The windows, 3 in number set high in the stone wall, were latched and frosted over. No balcony here, only the sheer drop to the ravine below. He ran a finger along the sill. Dust undisturbed. The fireplace held ashes cold as regret. The poker stood upright in its stand, untouched. "Observe," he said to the company crowding the threshold. The doctor was a creature of habit. Each night at 11, he retired here to review his cases. The maid brought coffee at 10:30. The cook confirms. After that, silence. Madame de Marais hovered like a moth, her sable gown brushing the floor. "I saw him at 11:15. He was reading my file." Her voice cracked. He looked up and smiled. Said, "Madame, your past is a necklace of lies. Shall we add another pearl?" I told him I'd paid enough. He laughed. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And then I left, slammed the door. I was distraught. She touched her throat where a diamond brooch glittered like a wound. I went to my room, took laudanum, slept. Captain Blake leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. I followed her out, heard the bolt shoot home. Then I went to the billiard room, smoked a cigar, thought about murder. He grinned without humour. Didn't do it, though. Too obvious. Herr Keller removed his pince-nez, polished them on a silk handkerchief. I was in the library, balancing accounts. The doctor's demands had become excessive. His voice was dry as parchment. At 11:30, I heard footsteps overhead. His, I thought. Pacing, then nothing. Fräulein Obermeier stood furthest back, half in shadow. Her apron was spotless despite the hour. Her hands worried the hem. "I prepared his nightly draught," she said softly. "Scopolamine and valerian. For his nerves. I left it on the tray at 11. He always took it himself." Poirot whirled. "You entered the study." "Only to the door. He opened it, took the glass, thanked me, said, 'Liesel, you are my good angel.' Then closed the door. I heard the bolt. The little Belgian's moustache twitched. And the combination to the safe?" She hesitated. 19-12-35. He changed it yesterday. Said it was a joke on fate. Poirot crossed to the Rembrandt etching, a moody Dutch landscape, and swung it aside on silent hinges. The safe was modern, German-made, its dial gleaming. He spun it with delicate fingers. 19-12-35. The door opened with a sigh. Inside, 4 dossiers, 1 space empty. The remaining files were thick, bound in red morocco. Poirot lifted the first. Desmarais, Clotilde. He read aloud. "Subject exhibits pathological vanity, will pay any price to conceal juvenile indiscretion in Lyon. 1919. Shoplifting turned legend. The stolen necklace now the centerpiece of her winter collection." He turned the page. A photograph. The young Clotilde, defiant, diamonds at her throat. Madame de Marais made a sound like a wounded bird. Next, Blake, Roderick. A military report, stamped dishonourable. Details of an opium den in Peshawar, a missing payroll, a native boy found dead. Blake's jaw worked, but he said nothing. Keller, Gustav. Ledger pages showing transfers from crashed banks in Vienna 1929. Sums that could buy small countries. Keller's face was stone. The fourth file was torn at the spine, the stub labelled Ohoishu. Poirot held it to the light. Fräulein Obermeyer, perhaps? Liesel's breath caught. He treated me for somnambulism, said I was cured. But last week he found new evidence. Letters from the asylum. Said I'd never inherit my father's sanitarium. That I would unfit. Poirot closed the safe, spun the dial. And the fifth file? Burned, Keller said suddenly. I saw smoke from the kitchen chimney at midnight. Thought it was the Yule log. Greta the cook appeared, wringing her hands. Ja, Herr Keller. The Fräulein asked for the stove to be lit. Said she was cold. I thought nothing of it. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Cold? Yes. Or destroying evidence. He moved to the desk, opened drawers with methodical care. In the bottom right, a glass vial, half empty, labelled scopolamine HCl. Beside it, a syringe in a velvet case. The doctor's truth serum, Liesel whispered. He used it on difficult patients. Said it opened the soul. Poirot lifted the vial, sniffed. Odourless, colourless. A dose in brandy would render a man suggestible, then catatonic. The body lives, but the mind sleeps. Perfect for relocation. Blake snorted. You're saying someone drugged him, walked him out to the balcony and left him to freeze, while the rest of us sat downstairs drinking port. Precisely, Poirot said. But the door was bolted from within. The key upon the desk. How does one exit a locked room? He examined the bolt again, then the floor. Beneath the rug, a faint scratch mark, wood on wood. He lifted the corner, a narrow panel, flush with the floorboards, no larger than a prayer book. A priest hole, Keller murmured. The chalet was built during the Reformation. Smuggler's roots. Poirot knelt, pressed the panel. It opened silently on oiled hinges, revealing a shaft dropping into darkness. A rope ladder hung within, swaying gently. The servant's stair, Liesel said, leads to the wine cellar. Unused since the new wing was built. Poirot's smile was triumphant. Voila! The impossible becomes merely ingenious. The killer drugs the doctor, suggests he walk to the balcony for air. There, in trance, wraps him in a sheet, silk, strong, leaves no trace. Drags him down the ladder across the terrace, deposits him in the snow. Returns the same way, bolts the door, leaves the key, the footprints, made on the return journey, backward upon the sheet, then abandoned in the drift. Madame Desmarais swayed. But whose sheet? Poirot produced the shred of silk, monogrammed L.O. Fräulein Obermeyer's, I think. Liesel's face crumpled. I lost a sheet yesterday. Thought the laundry. The clock in the hall struck 4. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the study, the temperature seemed to drop another degree. Poirot closed the panel, stood. One more thing, he said, crossing to the fireplace. He lifted the poker, stirred the ashes. Among the grey, a corner of red morocco, charred, but legible. Obam! Liesel stared, transfixed. He was going to ruin me. Poirot replaced the poker. Ruin, ma petite, is a two-edged blade, and tonight, it seems, the edge turned. He turned to the company, his voice gentle but inexorable. The sanctuary is breached. The secrets spill like blood, but the little grey cells, they do not sleep, they hunger. In the silence that followed, the wind screamed against the windows like a soul denied entrance. And somewhere in the chalet, a killer listened, heart pounding against the cage of ribs, waiting for the next move in a game where every piece was stained with guilt. Chapter 3. The Séance of Snow. The great hall had been transformed into a theatre of the uncanny. The long oak table was pushed against the wall, its surface now draped in black velvet that swallowed the firelight. 12 candles, tallow, not wax, stood in a perfect circle, their flames unnaturally still despite the draught that slithered beneath the doors. At the circle's heart sat Madame Clotilde Desmarais, her sable gown replaced by a robe of midnight silk embroidered with silver stars. Her face, stripped of powder, looked skeletal in the candle glow. The diamonds at her throat and ears glittered like frost on a corpse. "Spirits demand symmetry," she intoned, arranging 5 crystal glasses upside down upon the velvet. One for each soul present. The 6th. Her gaze flicked to the walnut chair where Dr. Varnholt's body had been laid beneath a sheet, the frozen smile hidden at last for the departed. Captain Blake lounged against the mantel, a tumbler of whisky in one hand, cynicism in the other. "Poppycock," he muttered, but his eyes tracked every movement. The storm outside had eased to a malevolent whisper. Snow tapped the windows like fingernails. Herr Keller sat stiffly on a straight-backed chair, his pince-nez reflecting the flames in twin discs of fire. He had produced a small leather notebook and was writing in it with a silver pencil, columns of figures perhaps, or a tally of sins. Fräulein Obermeyer hovered at the edge of the circle, her apron replaced by a simple grey dress, the braid at her nape so tight it pulled the skin at her temples. She clutched a sprig of edelweiss, its petals already wilting. Poirot alone remained apart, perched on the piano bench like a black bird of paradise. He had refused a seat within the circle. "I prefer to observe the living," he said, "before consulting the dead." Madame Desmarais ignored him. She placed her hands upon the velvet, fingers splayed. "We call upon the veil to thin. Elias Varnholt, speak through the ether. Name your killer." The candles flickered. Once, twice. Then, as though a hand passed over them, every flame bowed eastward in perfect unison. Blake's whisky sloshed. "Draught," he growled, but his voice cracked. Liesel began to sway. Her eyes rolled back until only the whites showed, luminous as moonlit snow. When she spoke, it was not her voice, but something older, hollowed by mountain echoes. "The Ice Maiden walks." The temperature plummeted, breath plumed white. The edelweiss in Liesel's hand blackened, petals curling like burnt paper. "She claims her due." A sound, soft, deliberate, came from the French windows. The latch lifted. The doors swung inward on silent hinges. Snow swirled in, a living thing, coalescing into a column of white that shimmered with impossible height. It had the shape of a woman, tall, veiled, arms outstretched. The candles guttered. Wax hissed. Madame Desmarais screamed, a sound torn from the diaphragm. Keller's pencil snapped. Blake's glass shattered against the hearth. Poirot did not move. His eyes, bright as emeralots, fixed on the apparition. "Très dramatique," he murmured. The figure drifted forward. Snowflakes clung to its form, defining cheekbones, a mouth parted in silent accusation. It pointed, one crystalline finger, directly at the sheeted corpse. Then it collapsed. Not melted, collapsed. The snow scattered across the rug in a perfect circle, revealing nothing. Only the curtain cord, sliced clean through, and a length of white silk caught on the window latch. The same silk Poirot had pocketed earlier, now multiplied, as though the chalet itself bled fabric. The candles relit themselves, one by one, pop, pop, pop. Liesel slumped forward, caught by Keller before her head struck the table. Her eyes fluttered open, pupils pinpricks. What happened?" "You were entranced, ma petite," Poirot said, rising. He crossed to the windows, examined the latch. The silk was finer than before, embroidered with tiny edelweiss, Liesel's monogram. And someone took advantage. Blake kicked at the scattered snow. It was already melting, leaving damp patches on the parquet. Bloody parlour tricks! Someone cut the cord, rigged the doors. But how the devil did they make the snow move? Poirot knelt, scooped a handful of the melt. It was not snow from outside, too fine, too uniform. He touched it to his tongue. Salt, he announced, finely ground, mixed with shaved ice from the kitchen. Very clever. Madame de Marais clutched her throat. But the voice, the ice maiden? Fräulein Obermeier's voice, Poirot said gently. Thrown, perhaps, by a child's trick. 2 rooms, a speaking tube. The chalet is riddled with such things. Smugglers' passages, remember? He gestured to the walls. Sound carries strangely in old wood. Keller closed his notebook with a snap. Then the séance was a sham from the start. Non, monsieur. A performance, yes, but with purpose. Poirot lifted the sliced curtain cord. Observe the cut, diagonal left to right, made by right-handed person standing inside the room. The silk on the latch was planted earlier, to be discovered now. The salt snow prepared in advance. All to suggest the supernatural, to frighten, to distract. Liesel was trembling. I swear I remember nothing. After the candles, to darkness. Poirot's gaze softened. Scopolamine, perhaps. A small dose in your evening cocoa. Enough to make you pliant, not unconscious. The killer needed your voice, your trance. You are, after all, the doctor's good angel. Who would suspect the nurse? Blake rounded on her. You little... No! Poirot's voice cracked like a whip. Accusations without proof are the luxury of fools. We deal in evidence. He turned to Madame de Marais. You organized this séance, madame. Why? She lifted her chin. To unmask the killer, of course. The spirits are remarkably convenient for those with guilty consciences. Poirot moved to the piano, lifted the lid. Inside, nestled among the strings, a small tin of salt, a razor blade, a spool of white silk thread. Your props, I believe. Madame de Marais paled. I merely wish to help. By terrifying your fellow guests? By implicating the innocent? Poirot closed the lid. Or by creating chaos in which to destroy more evidence? He crossed to the fireplace, where the Yule log smouldered. With the poker, he fished out a scrap of red morocco, another fragment of the burned dossier. The letters Meyer were visible. Keller leaned forward. Obermeier, it's her file. Liesel began to cry, soundless tears that cut channels through the powder on her cheeks. Poirot replaced the poker. Perhaps. Or perhaps the killer wishes us to think so. The séance was a diversion, yes, but diversions conceal as often as they reveal. He opened the French windows again. The balcony was a white plain, the footprints from earlier now softened by fresh snow. But something new caught his eye. A faint groove, barely visible, running from the railing to the spot where the body had lain. Wide, shallow, like something dragged. The sheet, he murmured, abandoned in the drift as I thought. But the killer returned for it, during the séance, when we were all occupied with ghosts. Blake followed his gaze. Then they're still here, trapped with us. Precisely. Poirot closed the windows. The mountain is our prison, the storm our warden, and somewhere in this chalet, a murderer breathes the same air, drinks the same brandy, and waits for the little grey cells to falter. He turned to the company, his voice soft but inexorable. The séance is over. The spirits have spoken, through salt and silk and terror. But Hercule Poirot listens to facts. And the facts, mes amis, are beginning to whisper a name. Outside the wind rose again. rattling the windows like bones in a box. Inside, the candles burnt lower, and the shadows grew long enough to hide a multitude of sins. Chapter 4. Footprints to Nowhere. Dawn clawed its way over the ridge, pale and reluctant, turning the snowfields the colour of watered blood. The storm had spent itself in the night. What remained was a hush so complete that the creak of the chalet's timbers sounded like gunshots. Poirot stood on the balcony in his fur-lined coat, breath pluming white. A silk tape measure in one gloved hand, and a magnifying lens in the other. The footprints, those impossible solitary prints, lay before him like a taunt from the mountain itself. He began at the balustrade. The railing was old pine, darkened by decades of resin and smoke. Fresh scratches marred the top rail. 4 parallel grooves, spaced like fingernails dragged in panic. Poirot traced them with a fingertip. Human, he murmured. Not ice, not rope. Someone climbed, or was pulled. The prints began precisely at the railing's edge. Narrow, elegant, the left heel worn on the outer corner. Size 5, Parisian last. He measured the stride, 22 inches, consistent. The depth, uniform as though the walker carried no burden. Yet the snow was deep, 18 inches in places, and the crust had frozen overnight. A lighter step would have broken through, a heavier would have sunk. These prints sat atop the crust like embroidery on linen. Poirot followed them, step by careful step. 10 paces from the railing, the prints reached the exact spot where Van Holt's body had been found. There they stopped. Not faded, not filled. Simply ceased, as though the walker had been lifted bodily into the sky. The snow beyond was virgin, unmarked by hand or boot or drag. Captain Blake emerged from the French windows, boots crunching. He carried a silver hip flask. The scent of whiskey cut through the pine. Still playing detective, eh? Told you, ghosts don't leave ladders. Poirot did not look up. Ghosts, mon capitaine, are notoriously untidy. These prints are meticulous. He knelt, brushed snow from the final print. Beneath the crust, a faint rectangular depression, no wider than a bedsheet. Observe, the weight was distributed, something flat lay here, then was removed. Blake snorted. A magic carpet? Silk, Poirot corrected. Strong, slippery, leaves no trace when dragged. The killer laid the sheet, placed the body atop, pulled it like a sled. The return journey, backward upon the sheet, created the illusion of prints to nowhere. Madame de Marais appeared in the doorway, wrapped in chinchilla, her face haggard beneath the remains of last night's coal. You're saying someone dragged poor Elias across the snow, while the rest of us slept. While the rest of you were occupied with spirits and salt, Poirot said. He stood brushing snow from his knees. The timing is crucial. The séance began at midnight. The footprints were made after 1, when the crust had set. The body was discovered at 3, 2 hours. Ample for a determined murderer. Hercule joined them, his breath fogging his pince-nez. He carried a thermometer. The mercury read -12 Celsius. The doctor would have frozen solid in 20 minutes at this temperature. Less if drugged. Precisely. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Scopolamine induces catalepsy. Body temperature plummets. The heart slows to a whisper. To the untrained eye, death, but not immediate. The killer needed only to keep him outside long enough for nature to finish the work. Fräulein Obermeyer hovered behind Keller, her grey dress dark with melted snow at the hem. She had been crying again. Her eyes were red-rimmed, the lashes clumped. "I was in the kitchen until 2, she whispered. "Greta saw me. I iced the cake. My hands," she held them out. The knuckles were raw. the nails broken. From the piping bag, not from dragging. Poirot's gaze flicked to her boots, half hidden beneath the dress. Brown leather, size 5, the left heel worn on the outer edge. A flake of snow clung to the sole, fresh, not from the kitchen. "Your boots, Fräulein, may I?" She hesitated, then lifted her skirt an inch. The boots were damp, the leather darkened at the toes. Poirot knelt, examined the tread. A pattern of tiny crosses, identical to the prints outside. He produced the tape measure. 22 inches, the stride matches. Liesel's breath hitched. I went to the pantry for more sugar. The back door was open. I closed it, that's all." Greta the cook appeared, wiping flour from her hands. "Ja, the Fräulein was with me. But at 1:30, she said she needed air. Went to the scullery, 5 minutes, maybe 10. I was rolling dough, didn't watch the clock. Poirot stood. 10 minutes, enough to step onto the terrace, lay the sheet, return. The drug would have rendered Dr. Varnholt pliant as a doll." Blake's face darkened. "You're accusing the nurse?" "I accuse no one," Poirot said. "I observe. The boots fit, the stride fits. The sheet, monogrammed L.O., was found in the drift, sodden but intact." He produced the silk from his pocket, now stiff with ice. "But observe the hem, torn, caught on the railing as the killer climbed back." Keller adjusted his pince-nez. "Then why the séance? Why the theatrics?" "To establish Fräulein Obermeier's trance," Poirot said. "To suggest she acted without consciousness. A sleepwalker cannot be held responsible, no? The ice maiden, the salt snow, all to muddy the waters." Madame de Marais clutched her furs. "But the footprints end. If she dragged him on the sheet, where are the return prints?" Poirot smiled. The killer walked backward upon the sheet, pulling it like a sleigh. The final prints, made as she stepped off, were the ones we see. The sheet was then rolled, carried inside through the servant's stair, but haste makes errors. He pointed to the balcony floorboards. A single drop of melted snow tinged pink. Blood! The doctor's nose bled in the cold. A trace the killer missed. Liesel began to tremble. I wouldn't." Poirot's voice softened. "You loved him, perhaps, or hated him. He held your future in his files, your inheritance, your sanity. He laughed at your nightmares, said you were his greatest failure. A woman scorned, ma petite, is capable of much." Blake stepped between them. "Enough. You're tormenting the girl." "Torment," Poirot said, "is the killer's specialty. The footprints to nowhere are a signature, a challenge, but Hercule Poirot does not lose to signatures." He turned to the railing, where the scratches caught the morning light. "The doctor fought, at the end. These marks are from his nails. He was not fully catatonic. The drug was miscalculated. He woke as the cold bit. Tried to climb back, but the killer was stronger, or more desperate." Keller's voice was dry. "And the motive? Beyond the files?" Poirot gestured to the chalet. "This is not merely a holiday. Dr. Varnholt invited you all for Christmas, his patients. He planned a grand revelation. On Boxing Day, he would expose you, ruin you. The files were his weapon. The séance, your idea, madame, was meant to preempt him. But the killer acted first." Madame de Marais paled. "I organized the séance to unmask the murderer, not to provide cover," Poirot finished. "The salt, the silk, the sliced cord, all from your room. You wished to implicate the nurse, to shift suspicion." She opened her mouth, closed it. The chinchilla trembled. Poirot turned back to the prints. The sun was higher now. The snow began to sparkle, cruelly beautiful. The footprints to nowhere are a lie, but lies have edges, and I, Hercule Poirot, am very good with edges. He knelt once more, brushing snow from the final print. Beneath, a faint imprint, almost erased. A second set of marks, smaller, deeper, bare feet. Mon Dieu, he whispered. The doctor walked part of the way himself, drugged, suggested, but not carried. The killer led him like a lamb to the slaughter, then dragged him the final distance when he collapsed. Liesel's knees buckled. Keller caught her. Her voice was a thread. He said, "Walk with me, Liesel. The air will clear your head." I thought it was a dream. Poirot stood, his face grave. It was a nightmare, ma petite, and you were its author. The sun cleared the ridge fully now, turning the snow to diamonds. But in the chalet's shadow, the footprints remained, cold, perfect, leading nowhere, and everywhere. Chapter 5. The Doctor's Ledger. Poirot led the procession back into the chalet as though conducting a funeral cortege. The French windows shut with a thud that echoed like a coffin lid. Meltwater from the balcony pooled on the parquet, dark and accusing. He paused at the threshold, produced a pristine handkerchief, and dabbed at the pink-tinged droplet on the floorboards. "Blood," he confirmed, folding the linen with care. "Type O, I wager. The universal donor and the universal victim." In the great hall the fire had been stoked. Flames leapt high, throwing shadows that capered across the beamed ceiling. The walnut chair stood empty now, the sheeted corpse removed to the pantry's marble slab, Greta's improvised morgue. The air smelled of pine smoke, wet wool, and the metallic tang of fear. Poirot crossed to the Rembrandt etching and swung it aside. The safe yawned open, its contents untouched since the previous revelation. He lifted the 4 remaining dossiers, laid them on the desk like cards in a game of patience. "Let us examine the ledger of souls," he said. "Dr. Varnholt was no mere psychiatrist. He was a collector. Of secrets, of leverage, of futures." He opened the first file. Desmarais. The photograph of the 16-year-old Clotilde stared out, defiant. Beneath, in Varnholt's spidery hand, payment received, 50,000 francs, 23rd December. Final demand, 100,000 by Boxing Day, or exposure to the press. The necklace, now the Étoile de Lion, will be returned to its rightful owner. A receipt was clipped to the page, Madame Desmarais' elegant signature trembling at the bottom. Madame Desmarais sank onto a chaise, chinchilla slipping from her shoulders. He promised it would end. He lied. Poirot turned to the next. Blake. The dishonourable discharge papers were yellowed, the ink faded. Opium smuggling, Peshawar, 1927. Native informant murdered. Court-martial suppressed by family influence. Payment, $5,000. Outstanding, $10,000. Threat, revelation to the War Office and the Calcutta Club. Blake's knuckles, whitened on the mantle. Keller. Embezzlement, credit and stalt collapse, 1929. 1.2 million Swiss francs diverted to personal accounts in Liechtenstein. Payment, 200,000 CHF in gold sovereigns delivered 24th of December. Final demand, 500,000 by New Year or Interpol notification. Keller removed his pince-nez, polished them slowly. His reflection in the lenses was a ghost. The 4th file, the torn stub labelled O, was thinner. Poirot lifted it carefully. Only 2 pages remained. The first Obermeyer Liesel, somnambulism, violent episodes, Bern Asylum, 1932-34. Father's will contingent on psychiatric clearance. Varnholt's diagnosis, recurrent danger to self and others. The second page was a letter dated 20th December. My dearest Liesel, your episodes have returned. I have no choice but to revoke my endorsement. The sanitarium will pass to your cousin. Forgive me. Evie Liesel stood frozen by the fireplace, the Edelweiss sprig now a blackened twig in her fist. He was sending me back, she whispered, to the restraints, the ice baths. He said it was for my own good. Poirot closed the file. And the 5th dossier? Burned, Keller repeated. I saw the smoke. Poirot moved to the hearth, knelt, and with the poker sifted the ashes. Among the grey fragments of red morocco glittered like rubies. He extracted one carefully. Maya, inheritance. Another, drug dosage. A third, larger, scopolamine variant, experimental. Induces cataleptic trance within 5 minutes. Reversible with atropine. Blake's laugh was hollow. His own poison? Fitting. Poirot stood, brushing ash from his gloves. The ledger is incomplete. The doctor kept a master list. Payments, threats, deadlines. Where is it? Greta entered, carrying a silver tray. Coffee, cognac, a plate of untouched Lebkuchen. Her apron was dusted with flour. Her eyes red from weeping or smoke. In the pantry, Herr Poirot, behind the ham. He hid things there, said the mice were honest. Poirot followed her through the baize door into the pantry's chill. The corpse lay on the marble, sheet drawn to the chin, frost still glittering on the beard. Poirot averted his gaze, respect for the dead, or perhaps for the living who must yet face them. Behind a prosciutto, wrapped in oilcloth, a slim black ledger. He carried it back to the hall, laid it beside the dossiers. The pages were columns of figures, dates, initials. CD, 50,000, RB, 5,000, GK, 200,000, LO, 0, against Liesel's name, a single word, exposure. Poirot's finger traced the final entry dated 24th of December, Boxing Day revelation, all debts called, sanitarium to be signed over to Fräulein Obermeier's cousin, public reading in the salon, guests to witness. Madame Desmarais gasped. He meant to ruin us all, at Christmas. Festive, Blake muttered. Poirot closed the ledger. The motive is clear, but the method... He turned to Liesel. You prepared his nightly draft, scopolamino and valerian. But last night, something more. She shook her head violently. The usual dose. I measured it myself. Poirot opened the ledger again, flipped to a blank page at the back. Faint indentations, writing from the sheet above. He held it to the firelight. LO, 2cc experimental, test subject compliant, suggestibility 100%, duration 3 hours. Liesel's hand flew to her mouth. That's my handwriting, but I don't remember. Scopolamine, Poirot said softly. Administered to you, ma petite. By the doctor himself, perhaps. To test his new variant, you were his guinea pig. Keller's voice was sharp. Then she killed him in a trance. No, the trance was induced later, by the killer. The doctor drank his own medicine, reversed. Someone switched the glasses. Greta hovered in the doorway. The tray was in the study at 11. I saw it. 2 glasses. One for the doctor, one for someone else. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The someone else who entered the study after the bolt was thrown, through the priest hole. He crossed to the desk, opened the bottom drawer. The vial of scopolamine was now empty. Beside it, a second syringe, its plunger depressed. A faint smear of blood on the needle. Blake swore. The bastard dosed himself. Or was dosed. Poirot lifted the syringe to the light. The needle is bent, a struggle. The doctor injected himself, or tried to resist. Madame Desmarais rose, swaying. Then the killer was in the room with him. Oui, from 11:15 until the drug took hold, talking, persuading. Then Poirot mimed a plunger. The suggestion? Walk with me, Elias. The air will clear your head. The balcony, the sheet, the snow. He turned to Liesel. Your boots were worn outside, yes, but not by you. Someone borrowed them. Someone who knew your stride, your size. Someone who left the pantry door ajar so you would be blamed. Liesel's knees buckled. She clutched the mantle. Who? Poirot's gaze swept the room. The one who benefited most from the doctor's death. The one whose file was burned. The one who organized the séance to implicate you. Madame Desmarais stepped back, diamonds flashing. You cannot accuse me. I accuse no one, Poirot said. I observe. Your perfume, L'Heure Bleue, lingers in the study, on the balcony railing. Your gloves, kid leather size 6, were found in the drift, monogrammed CD. You needed the doctor silenced before Boxing Day. You used Liesel's boots, her sheet, her trance. You burned your own file. Yes, the 5th was yours, not hers. The O was a blind. Keller's pencil snapped again. But the ledger shows LO, 0, because Liesel paid nothing. She had no money, only her future. You, madam, paid in installments. The final demand was your ruin. Madame de Marais laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Prove it! Poirot opened the ledger to the indentations. Your handwriting, madame. The 2cc experimental. You tested it on Liesel first, during the séance, then on the doctor. The bent needle, his resistance. You dragged him yourself, strong from years of lifting bolts of silk. The footprints end because you walked backward in Liesel's boots, the sheet beneath your feet. Blake moved toward her. You cold-blooded, non. Poirot's voice cut like a blade. The little grey cells demand order. The ledger is the key, but one entry remains. He turned the final page. A single line, in Van Holt's hand. If I die, the truth dies with me, unless... beneath a wax seal. Poirot broke it. A photograph tumbled out. Madame de Marais, younger, standing beside Van Holt in a Vienna sanatorium. Her belly swollen with child. The room froze. Poirot's voice was gentle. Your secret, madame, not theft, not vanity, a child, born in shame, given up, the doctor's child. He threatened to claim him, to take him from the life you built. Madame de Marais collapsed, sobbing. The chinchilla pooled around her like spilled ink. Poirot closed the ledger. The doctor's ledger is balanced, but the account of murder, that is another matter. Outside, the sun climbed higher, turning the snow to fire. Inside, the chalet held its breath, waiting for the next revelation in a house where every ledger had a price. Chapter 6. Avalanche of Alibis. The chalet shuddered as though the mountain itself exhaled. A low rumble rolled through the valley, gathering force until the windows rattled in their frames and the chandelier's crystals chimed like alarm bells. Poirot was already at the French windows, palms pressed to the glass. Beyond the balcony, the snow slope opposite the ravine detached in a single graceful sheet, white turning to thunder. It poured down the face of the Eiger's lesser cousin, swallowing pines, boulders, the narrow pass that linked Chalet Edelweiss to the world. When the roar faded, silence returned, deeper than before. The avalanche had sealed them in until spring. Providential, Poirot murmured, turning from the window. No escape, no rescue, only truth. The great hall felt smaller now, the fire's heat oppressive. The clock on the mantel struck noon. Its chime was swallowed by the hush of snow pressing against every wall. Madame de Marais lay prostrate on the chaise, chinchilla discarded, face buried in a cushion that muffled her sobs. Blake poured whiskey with a shaking hand, the decanter clinking against the glass. Keller stood by the safe, notebook open, pencil poised as though balancing the avalanche itself. Liesel sat on the piano bench, hands folded in her lap, staring at the blood-flecked handkerchief Poirot had left on the desk like evidence in a trial. Poirot clapped once, sharp, decisive. Mesdames et messieurs, the mountain has spoken. We are prisoners of geography and guilt. Let us use the time wisely. Alibis, complete, precise, unbreakable. He began with Madame de Marais. Madame, you retired at 10:30, laudanum. Yet your perfume lingers in the study, on the balcony. Explain. She lifted her head, eyes swollen. I fetched my migraine pills from the doctor's cabinet. 11:15. He was alive, reading. I took 2 tablets, returned to my room. The maid can confirm. She brought hot water at 11:30. Greta nodded from the doorway. Ja, Frau Desmarais was in bed. I tucked the bottle under her pillow myself. Poirot's moustache twitched. And the gloves found in the drift? Monogrammed CD, kid leather, torn at the thumb. Madame Desmarais paled. I lost them yesterday on a walk. Convenient. Poirot turned to Blake. Capitaine, you argued with the doctor at 11, then billiard room, alone, smoked a cigar, Burma cheroot if you must know, drank 2 whiskies, went to bed at 12:30. My Batman, well, the valet here, saw me undress. The valet, a lugubrious Swiss named Hans, confirmed with a bow. The captain snored like a locomotive, monsieur, from 1 o'clock onward. Keller closed his notebook. I was in the library until midnight, balancing the doctor's demands against my reserves. At 12:15, I heard footsteps overhead, the study, pacing, then silence. I retired at 12:30. My door was locked from within. Liesel's voice was barely audible. I prepared the draft at 10:45, left it on the tray, went to the kitchen, iced the cake until 2. Greta was with me, except for the 10 minutes I fetched sugar from the pantry. Greta wrung her apron. True, but the back door was open when she returned. Snow on the mat. I thought nothing of it. Poirot paced, hands clasped behind his back. 4 alibis, all porous. The priest hole connects every room. The study, the library, the billiard room, the kitchen. A ghost could move unseen. He stopped before the fireplace, where the Yule log had burned to embers. With the poker, he fished out another fragment of red Morocco, larger this time. Experimental dosage, reversible with atropine. He held it to the light. The doctor kept notes on his new scopolamine. The killer used them. Blake slammed his glass down. Enough riddles! The nurse had motive, means, opportunity. Her boots, her sheet, her file. Liesel flinched as though struck. I didn't burn my file. Someone else did. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Precisely. The burned fragments spell Obermeyer, but the handwriting on the dosage note is not yours. Observe. He produced the ledger's indented page. The 2cc experimental, the loops, the slant, Madame Desmarais' hand. She forged the entry to implicate you. Madame Desmarais sat up, rigid. Lies! Poirot opened the desk drawer, lifted the empty scopolamine vial. Your fingerprints, madame, on the glass, and on the syringe, the bent needle. You entered the study at 11:15, not for pills. You brought brandy, laced it, waited for the drug to take hold. She laughed brittle. You have no proof. Proof is in the details. Poirot crossed to the balcony doors, flung them open. The avalanche had buried the lower terrace. Only the railing remained, draped in white. He pointed to the scratches. These marks, made by kid gloves, not bare hands. The leather tore. A scrap clings to the wood. Grey kid, monogrammed CD. Blake strode to the railing, peered over. By God, he's right. Poirot continued. You suggested the walk. The air will clear your head, Elias. He obeyed, drugged, docile. You laid your chinchilla on the snow, luxurious, but practical, dragged him upon it. The fur left no trace, returned through the priest hole, burned your file, planted Liesel's sheet. The séance was your masterstroke. Salt, snow, silk, the nurse's trance, all to frame her. Madame Desmarais rose, swaying. You cannot prove intent. Poirot produced the photograph from the ledger, the swollen belly, the Vienna sanatorium. This child, your son, the doctor's bastard. He threatened to claim him on Boxing Day, to take him from the life you built on lies. You killed to protect your empire. Silence. The fire crackled. Outside, snow creaked against the windows like a living thing. Keller's voice was dry. And the avalanche? Coincidence? Poirot said, or divine comedy. The mountain buries the past, but not the truth. Blake moved toward Madame de Marais. You used us all? The séance? The ghosts? She backed away, diamonds flashing. I had no choice. He would have destroyed me. Liesl stood, trembling. You used me, my nightmares, my boots. You made me the monster. Poirot's voice was gentle. Non, ma petite. You were the pawn. The queen sacrifices the pawn to save herself. Madame de Marais lunged for the door, but Blake caught her wrist. She screamed, a sound torn from the diaphragm. Let me go. The pass is blocked. I'll die here. Better than the gallows, Blake growled. Poirot raised a hand. Patience. The avalanche seals us, yes, but the truth is a chisel. It cuts through snow. He returned to the desk, opened the ledger to the final page. Beneath the wax seal, a second photograph, Madame de Marais and Varnholt, younger, arms entwined. On the back, in Varnholt's hand, Clotilde, my greatest success and my greatest failure. Poirot closed the ledger. The doctor loved you, madame, in his way, twisted, possessive. He built his empire on your shame. You ended it with his own drug. She collapsed, sobbing. He said the child was his triumph, proof of his genius. I begged him to let me keep the life I'd made. He laughed. The clock struck the half-hour. The chalet groaned under its burden of snow. Poirot stood before the fire, silhouetted against the flames. Alibis collapsed like snow bridges. Madame de Marais, your migraine pills were atropine, the antidote. You carried it in case the dose was wrong. The valet saw you take a tablet at midnight, not laudanum, to steady your nerves. Hans nodded slowly. Ja, a white pill from a blue bottle. Poirot turned to Liesl. You're 10 minutes in the pantry. Madame sent you. Fetch sugar, she said while she dragged the body. The open door. To implicate you? Liesl's eyes filled. I thought I was dreaming. You were drugged, Poirot said. A smaller dose. To confuse, to make you doubt your own mind. Keller closed his notebook. Then it's over. No. Poirot's voice was soft. It is merely intermission. The avalanche has trapped the killer, but also the witnesses. Justice must wait for spring. Until then, we live with the truth. He gestured to the windows, where snow piled higher, erasing the world. The mountain is our jury, the chalet, our cell, and Hercule Poirot, your warden. Madame de Marais laughed, a broken sound. You'll starve us all. No, Poirot said. There is food for months, wood, water from the well. We will endure, and you, madam, will confess again and again until the snow melts and the gendarmes come. Blake released her wrist. She sank to the rug, chinchilla pooling like blood. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the avalanche settled, a white tomb over the pass. Poirot returned to the balcony doors, gazed at the buried world. Avalanche of alibis, he murmured, all collapsed. Only the truth remains, cold, hard, eternal. The chalet held its breath. 6 souls, 1 secret, and a mountain that would not let them go. Chapter 7. The drug in the brandy. The pantry had become a morgue, the air thick with the scent of ham, frost, and the faint sweetness of decay, held at bay by the mountain's cold. Dr. Varnholt lay on the marble slab, sheet drawn to his chin. The frozen smile now softened into something almost peaceful. Poirot stood over him, a small black figure against the white, his breath the only movement in the room. With gloved fingers he lifted the corpse's upper lip, revealing teeth stained faintly blue. He produced a glass vial from his pocket, uncorked it, and wafted the air above the mouth. A bitter almond note, cyanide. No, something subtler. Scopolamine, he announced to the company crowded in the doorway. the variant he boasted of. Odorless in life, but the body exhales its secrets. Blake shouldered forward, whiskey flask forgotten. You're saying the bastard drank his own poison? Non, mon capitaine. He was made to drink it. Poirot turned the corpse's head gently. A faint bruise bloomed at the hinge of the jaw. Thumb and forefinger marks. Held, forced. The glass pressed to his lips until he swallowed. Madame de Marais clutched the doorframe, chinchilla trailing like a bridal train. He would never. He was drugged already, Poirot cut in. A smaller dose earlier, perhaps in the coffee Greta served at 10. Enough to dull resistance. Then the brandy. The killer waited until the paralysis set in. Keller's pince-nez flashed. The tray, 2 glasses. Precisely. Poirot led them back to the study. The silver tray sat on the desk, untouched since discovery. 2 crystal tumblers, 1 empty, 1 with a finger of amber liquid and a faint residue of white crystals at the bottom. Poirot lifted the empty glass, sniffed. Brandy! And this, he tilted the second. The same, but laced. The crystals dissolved slowly. The killer poured both, switched them when the doctor looked away. Liesl hovered at the threshold, grey dress dark with melted snow at the hem. I prepared the draft at 10:45. Valerian and the usual scopolamine. I left it on the tray with the brandy decanter. The doctor always took his medicine himself. Poirot's eyes gleamed. But last night someone else poured. He lifted the decanter, swirled it. A faint sediment clung to the glass. The experimental variant, potent, 5 minutes to trance, 3 hours to catalepsy. The doctor drank at 11:15. Madame de Marais saw him. By 11:30, he was clay in the killer's hands. Blake snorted. And the killer was in the room the whole time. The door was bolted. Poirot crossed to the priest-hole panel, pressed it open. The rope ladder swayed in the draught. Entry at 11! The killer hid here! He gestured to the narrow space behind the desk until the drug took hold, then emerged, poured the brandy, suggested the walk. The air will cure your headache, Elias. The doctor obeyed. Down the ladder, across the terrace, into the snow. Madame de Marais' voice was a thread. You keep accusing me. I accuse the evidence, Poirot said. He lifted the laced glass, held it to the light. Observe the rim, a smear of lipstick, rose carmine. Your shade, madame. The doctor wore none. She touched her mouth instinctively. I tasted the brandy to check the temperature. Convenient. Poirot set the glass down. The bruise on his jaw, your grip, the height matches. You are tall in heels, the gloves in the drift, torn because you dragged him yourself. The chinchilla left no trace, but the lipstick did. Keller stepped forward, notebook open. The dosage, how much? Poirot produced the charred fragment from the ashes. 2 cubic centimeters, enough to fell an ox. The doctor's notes confirm, subject compliant within 5 minutes, suggestibility absolute. The killer needed only to whisper, walk with me. Liesl's hands twisted in her apron. But the footprints, my boots, borrowed, Poirot said. You were in the kitchen until 2. Greta saw you. But at 1:30, someone entered the scullery, took your boots from the rack, wore them outside. The stride is yours, but the weight is heavier. Observe, he produced the silk sheet from his pocket, now thawed and heavy with water. The hem bears a stain, brandy, spilled in haste, and here he pointed to a tear at the corner, caught on your boot heel as the killer stepped off the sheet. Blake's face darkened. Then why the séance? Why implicate the girl? Poirot turned to Madame de Marais. To establish reasonable doubt. If Liesl acted in a trance, she could not be guilty. The ice maiden, the salt snow, all to suggest somnambulism. You drugged her too, a smaller dose in her cocoa, enough to make her pliant for the séance, to speak in that hollow voice. But the plan unravelled. The footprints were too perfect, the lipstick too careless. Madame Desmarais laughed, a sound like breaking ice. You have no proof I was in the study after 11:15. Poirot opened the desk drawer, lifted the blue bottle Hans had mentioned. Atropine tablets. Your antidote. You took one at midnight, Hans saw. To counter any splashback from the laced brandy. The bottle is half empty. You feared the dose was too strong. Hans nodded from the doorway. Yeah, she asked for water. Her hands shook. Poirot continued. The priest hole ladder. Your perfume clings to the ropes. L'heure bleue. Unmistakable. You descended at 11:30, dragged the doctor across the terrace on your chinchilla, left him to freeze, returned at 1:45, burned your file in the kitchen stove, planted Liesel's sheet in the drift. The avalanche sealed your crime. Keller closed his notebook. But the child, the photograph. A motive, yes, but not the only one. Poirot lifted the ledger, turned to the final page. Beneath the wax seal, a second entry. Clotilde's final payment, the Étoile de Lion necklace, to be worn at the Boxing Day revelation, then returned to its rightful owner, the girl from 1919. Madame Desmarais' hand flew to her throat. The diamond choker glittered, larger than before, the centerpiece of stone the size of a quail's egg. He couldn't. It's mine. It was never yours, Poirot said softly. Stolen in Lyon. The doctor bought it back, planned to expose you wearing it. Your empire, built on a lie, would crumble. The child was leverage. The necklace was humiliation. Blake moved toward her. You killed him for a bauble. For everything, she whispered. The child, the name, the life I made from nothing. Liesel's voice was small. You used me, my nightmares, my boots. You made me doubt my own mind. Madame Desmarais turned on her, eyes wild. You were nothing. A nurse with delusions. He favored you, called you his good angel, while I paid and paid and paid. Poirot raised a hand. Enough. The drug in the brandy is the key. The residue matches the vial in the safe. The lipstick matches your shade. The gloves match your monogram. The perfume matches your soul. He crossed to the fireplace, lifted the poker, and stirred the ashes once more. A final fragment emerged, reversible with atropine, but not with cold. The doctor's last note, written as the drug took hold. Poirot replaced the poker. He knew, at the end, tried to write a warning, but the cold came too fast. Madame Desmarais sank to her knees, diamonds scattering across the rug like frozen tears. I only wanted him to stop, to let me keep what was mine. Poirot's voice was gentle. You kept nothing, madame, only a necklace of lies, and a heart of ice. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the avalanche settled deeper, a white shroud over the pass. Inside, the chalet held its breath, the drug in the brandy now a confession hanging in the air. Bitter, irreversible, eternal. Chapter 8. The silk sheet revelation. The great hall had become a courtroom without a judge. Afternoon light slanted through the frost-laced windows, turning the snow outside into a wall of hammered silver. The avalanche had buried the world. Inside, the air was thick with wood smoke, brandy, and the sour residue of confession. Madame Desmarais knelt on the Persian rug, diamonds scattered like hailstones, her chinchilla abandoned in a heap. Blake stood over her, fists clenched. Keller sat at the desk, notebook open to a fresh page, pencil scratching a silent verdict. Liesel remained on the piano bench, hands folded so tightly the knuckles blanched. Poirot moved among them like a black cat in a dovecote, gathering threads. He began with the silk. From his pocket he drew the sodden sheet. once white, now grey with meltwater and blood. He spread it across the walnut table, the monogram Elo stark in the firelight. "Observe," he said, voice soft but carrying to every corner. "The sheet is not merely a prop. It is the murder weapon's accomplice." Blake snorted. "A bedsheet." "Silk," Poirot corrected. "From Fräulein Obermeier's room. Strong as steel, slippery as ice. Laid upon the snow, the body placed atop, then dragged. The fabric erases all trace save the final prints, made as the killer stepped backward, pulling the sheet like a sleigh." He pointed to the hem. A dark stain, brandy, spread in a crescent. "Spilled in haste, and here, a tear at the corner, threads frayed where a boot heel had caught. Liesel's boot, borrowed, worn by another." Madame Desmarais lifted her head. "You keep saying that. Prove it." Poirot's smile was thin. "Patience, madame. The sheet tells its own story." He turned the fabric over. On the underside, faint impressions, ridges like corduroy. The terrace floorboards. The killer dragged the doctor from the balcony to the spot where he was found. 10 paces. The sheet protected the snow, distributed the weight. The return journey, backward, created the illusion of prints to nowhere. Keller leaned forward, pince-nez glinting. "Then why abandon the sheet in the drift?" "Because the avalanche threatened," Poirot said. "At 1:45, the mountain rumbled, a warning. The killer panicked, rolled the sheet, carried it inside through the priest hole, meant to burn it with the file. But time ran out. The séance began at midnight. The body was placed at 1:30. The sheet was hidden in the drift to be retrieved later, but the snow came faster." He crossed to the French windows, flung them open. The balcony was a white plain, the railing half buried. With a small trowel produced from his coat, he dug into the drift beside the railing. After 3 scoops, metal struck fabric. He pulled free a second sheet, chinchilla, sodden, monogrammed CD. Blake whistled. "Her cloak." "No," Poirot said, "a lining. Removed from Madame Desmarais' coat. Fur leaves no trace on snow." She dragged the doctor upon it first, from the priest hole to the balcony. Then switched to the silk sheet for the final journey. The chinchilla was too heavy, too slow. The silk was faster. Madame Desmarais laughed, a cracked sound. "You're inventing fairy tales." Poirot held up the chinchilla lining. "Observe the tear, matching the glove found in the drift. The fur caught on the railing as you climbed back. You left it buried, meaning to retrieve it after the avalanche passed. But the snow sealed everything." He laid the lining beside the silk sheet. The stains aligned. Brandy on silk, blood on fur. The doctor's nose bled as the cold set in. The fur absorbed it. The silk caught the spill when you poured the second glass. Liesel's voice was a whisper. "You used my sheet, my boots, my nightmares." Madame Desmarais turned on her. "You were nothing, a tool. He favoured you, called you his good angel, while I paid in blood and diamonds." Poirot raised a hand. "The silk sheet is the skeleton. Now, the flesh." He returned to the desk, opened the ledger to the indented page. "The dosage note, 2cc experimental. Your handwriting, madame, forged to implicate Liesel, but the ink is fresh, the pressure deeper. You wrote it after the murder to muddy the waters." Keller's pencil paused. "And the séance?" "A masterpiece of misdirection," Poirot said. "The salt snow, the sliced cord, the silk on the latch, all planted during the avalanche warning. You needed chaos to retrieve the chinchilla, to burn the evidence, but the mountain acted first." He lifted the curtain cord from the séance, cleanly cut. "Diagonal, left to right, right-handed. Your height, madame. The silk thread on the latch, torn from Liesel's sheet, planted to suggest a ghost. The salt in the piano, your prop box." Blake's face was stone. You drugged the girl, too. A smaller dose, Poirot confirmed. In her cocoa at 11, enough to make her pliant for the séance, to speak in that hollow voice. You needed her trance to establish somnambulism. If she killed unconsciously, suspicion would fracture. Madame de Marais rose, swaying. You have no confession. Poirot's eyes gleamed. I have the sheet. He turned the silk over again. Beneath the monogram, faint embroidery, tiny edelweiss. Liesel's, but observe the stitching. The thread is black, new. The original was white. You replaced it after the murder to match her dress. The original thread, white, was used to tie the chinchilla bundle in the drift. He produced a spool from his pocket. White silk, the end frayed. Found in your room, madame, beneath the chaise. You meant to burn it with the file, but the avalanche interrupted. Madame de Marais lunged for the spool, but Blake caught her wrist. She screamed, a sound like tearing fabric. Let me go! The snow will take us all! Poirot continued, inexorable. The railing scratches, made by the chinchilla's silver clasp. It caught as you dragged him over. The clasp is missing, found in the drift, bent. The gloves, torn because you gripped the railing to pull yourself up. The lipstick on the glass, rose carmine, your shade, transferred when you forced the brandy down his throat. He lifted the bent syringe. The needle, caught in his collar as he struggled. The bruise on his jaw, your thumb. The height matches. You are tall in heels. The stride in Liesel's boots, heavier because you carried the sheet rolled under one arm. Keller closed his notebook. The child was the final straw, Poirot said. The doctor planned to claim him on Boxing Day, to take him from the life you built on the stolen necklace. You killed to protect your empire and your son. Madame de Marais collapsed, diamonds scattering. He laughed, said the boy was his triumph, proof of his genius. I begged him to let me keep the lie. He refused. Liesel stood, trembling. You made me the monster. You used my nightmares to hide your own. Poirot's voice was gentle. The silk sheet reveals all. The stains, the tears, the threads. It is the map of your crime, madame. From the priest hole to the snow, every step is written in silk. He folded the sheet with care, the monogram facing outward. The avalanche sealed the pass, but the sheet sealed your fate. You dragged him to his death upon luxury, chinchilla and silk, fitting for a woman who built her life on stolen diamonds. Blake released her wrist. She sank to the rug, chinchilla and silk pooling around her like a shroud. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the snow creaked against the windows, a white jury that would not melt until spring. Poirot stood before the hearth, the silk sheet in his hands. The revelation is complete. The sheet does not lie. It only waits for the thaw, for the gendarmes, for justice. The chalet held its breath. 6 souls, 1 secret, and a mountain that had become their tomb. The silk sheet, once a tool of murder, now lay across the table like a surrender flag. Stained, torn, but undeniable. Chapter 9. The Little Grey Cells. Twilight bled crimson across the snowfields, the sun a dying ember behind the Eiger's jagged teeth. Inside Chalet Edelweiss, the fire had burned low, casting long shadows that danced like accusers across the beamed ceiling. The silk sheet lay folded on the walnut table, chinchilla lining beside it, 2 shrouds for 1 murder. Madame de Marais sat chained to the chaise with Blake's regimental tie, wrists raw, diamonds stripped and piled in a crystal bowl like confiscated evidence. Keller stood by the safe, ledger closed, his face the colour of ash. Liesel remained on the piano bench, Edelweiss sprig now a blackened skeleton in her fist. Poirot paced before the hearth, a small black engine of precision, his patent leather shoes clicking on the parquet like the ticking of a clock that would not stop until justice struck the hour. "Mes amis," he began, voice soft but resonant, "the mountain has imprisoned us, but the little grey cells, they are free, they demand order, method, and tonight they deliver truth." He stopped before Madame de Marais. "You have confessed in fragments, madame, the drug, the sheet, the child, but the symphony requires a finale. Let us play it note by note." He lifted the silk sheet, unfolded it with a snap. "Fact 1, the footprints, size 5, Parisian last, left heel worn outward. Fräulein Obermeier's boots, but the stride, 22 inches, consistent, yet the weight heavier. You, madame, are 5'9" in heels. Liesel is 5'3". You wore her boots over your own stockings, explaining the dampness, the snow inside." Madame de Marais spat. "Circumstantial." Poirot's smile was winter. "Fact 2, the priest hole. Your perfume, l'heure bleue, clings to the rope ladder. The clasp from your chinchilla, silver, bent, found in the drift. The gloves, kid leather, torn thumb, monogram CD, all yours." He turned to the desk, opened the ledger to the indented page. "Fact 3, the dosage note, 2cc experimental. Your handwriting, loops tall, slants sharp, forged to implicate Liesel. But the ink is indigo, not the black of her pen, yours from the séance props." Keller's pencil scratched. "The brandy? Fact 4, Poirot continued, the laced glass, lipstick, rose carmine, your shade. The bruise on the doctor's jaw, your grip, the bent syringe, caught in his collar as he struggled. You forced the brandy, waited for catalepsy, suggested the walk." Blake growled. "The séance. Fact 5, misdirection. Salt snow from the kitchen, silk thread from Liesel's sheet, curtain cord cut with your embroidery scissors. Found in your room, blade still dusted with salt. You drugged Liesel with cocoa at 11, 0.5 cc, enough for trance, not death. Needed her voice for the Ice Maiden." Liesel's whisper cut the air. "You made me speak of death." Poirot's gaze softened. "You were the pawn, ma petite. Fact 6, the files, 4 remained, the 5th, yours, madame, was burned. But the fragments spell Desmarais, not Obermeier. The O was a blind. The real target, your son. The doctor planned to claim him on Boxing Day, to expose the Étoile de Lion as stolen, to ruin you." He lifted the necklace from the bowl, diamonds flashing like accusations. "Fact 7, the necklace, stolen in Lyon, 1919, bought back by Van Holt, to be worn by you at the revelation, then returned to its rightful owner. Your empire, built on a lie, would crumble." Madame de Marais laughed, a sound like shattering crystal. "He wanted the boy, my son, his triumph." "Fact 8, Poirot said, voice gentle. "The child, born in Vienna, 1920, given up, raised as the son of a couturier's patron. The doctor's letters found in the safe's false bottom prove paternity. He threatened to take him, to make him heir to the sanitarium. You killed to protect your lie." He crossed to the fireplace, lifted the poker, and drew out a final fragment. Charred Morocco, legible, Clotilde, my son, our legacy. Fact 9, the doctor's last note, written as the drug took hold. He knew, tried to warn, but the cold came. Blake's fists clenched. And the avalanche. Fact 10, coincidence or fate. The mountain acted at 1:45 when you returned through the priest hole. You heard the rumble, panicked, abandoned the chinchilla in the drift. Meant to retrieve it after the séance, but the snow sealed everything. Poirot turned to Liesel. You, ma petite, were the perfect scapegoat. The nurse with nightmares. The boots, the sheet, the trance. Madame de Marais used your terror to hide her own. Liesel stood trembling. You burned my file to frame me." "No," Poirot said. "She burned her file. The fragments were planted. The real Obermeyer file, intact, shows no motive. Only your father's will, contingent on Van Holt's endorsement. He planned to revoke it, to send you back to the asylum. But you had no money to pay, no leverage. Madame did." He lifted the ledger's final page. Beneath the wax seal, a third photograph. Madame Desmarais, Van Holt, and a boy of 15, dark eyes, her mouth. "Your son, madame, the doctor's heir. You killed to keep him yours." Madame Desmarais lunged, tie snapping taut. "He was mine. I built everything. The gowns, the salons, the name. He would have taken it all." Poirot's voice was steel. "You took his life, with his own drug, his own suggestion. Walk with me, Elias." Down the ladder, across the terrace, upon chinchilla, then silk. You left him to freeze, smiling, because the drug fixed his face in rictus. He folded the silk sheet, placed it beside the chinchilla. The little grey cells enumerate 10 facts unbreakable. The boots, the perfume, the lipstick, the gloves, the clasp, the ink, the salt, the necklace, the child, the avalanche. All converge on you, madame. Keller closed his notebook. "Confession!" Madame Desmarais sagged, tie cutting into her wrists. "Yes, God help me. Yes, I drugged him, dragged him, left him for my son, for my name." Silence. The fire crackled. Outside the snow creaked. A white prison. Poirot turned to the company. "The case is closed. The little grey cells have spoken. Madame Clotilde Desmarais, murderess. Motive, maternal love, twisted into empire. Method, scopolamine, silk, snow. Opportunity, the priest hole, the avalanche." He gestured to the windows. "Spring will come, the gendarmes with it. Until then we endure with truth." Blake released the tie. Madame Desmarais collapsed, sobbing into the chinchilla. Liesel crossed to her, knelt, touched her shoulder. "You used my nightmares, but you lived yours." Poirot returned to the hearth, warmed his hands. "The little grey cells do not sleep. They hunger, and tonight they are sated." The clock struck 6. Crimson faded to indigo outside. Inside, the chalet held its breath. 6 souls, 1 truth, and a mountain that would not forgive. The silk sheet lay folded, stains dark, threads frayed, but the story it told was perfect, inevitable, complete. Chapter 10. Order and Method. The fire had sunk to a bed of ruby coals. The great hall glowed like the heart of a dying star. Outside, the mountain night pressed black against the windows, the avalanche a silent sentinel. The clock on the mantel struck 9, its chime the only sound, until Poirot's shoes clicked across the parquet and stopped before the walnut table. Upon it lay the instruments of revelation, the silk sheet, the chinchilla lining, the bent syringe, the rose carmine-stained glass, the Étoile de Lion necklace glittering like a noose of ice. Madame Desmarais sat unbound now. Blake's tie returned to his throat, yet she did not move. Her wrists bore purple bracelets. Her eyes were fixed on the diamonds as though they might still save her. Poirot addressed the room with the calm of a priest at vespers. "Order and method, mes amis. The little grey cells have marched. Now they stand at attention. Let us review the campaign one final time, so that even the snow may bear witness." He lifted the silk sheet, let it unfold like a banner of surrender. 11 o'clock, Madame Desmarais enters the study through the priest hole. Perfume trailing, chinchilla clasped. The doctor is already dulled by the first dose in his coffee. She pours brandy, laces the second glass with 2 cubic centimeters of his experimental scopolamine. Lipstick on the rim, rose carmine. She forces it between his teeth. The bruise blooms beneath his jaw. 5 minutes, the eyes glaze, the smile fixes. He laid the sheet aside, took up the chinchilla lining. 11:30. Suggestion. Walk with me, Elias. The air will cure you. He obeys, docile, barefoot on the cold boards. Down the rope ladder. Across the lower terrace upon the chinchilla, fur, muffles every trace. 10 paces to the balcony railing. There the lining snags, the silver clasp bends and falls. She switches to the silk sheet, lighter, faster. Drags him the final distance. The left boot heel catches the hem. Tear, brandy stain. She steps backward upon the sheet, pulling it like a sleigh. The footprints appear to end. The sheet is rolled, carried inside, meant for the stove. Poirot's voice softened. But the mountain rumbles. Avalanche warning. Panic. She thrusts the bundle into the drift beside the railing, returns through the priest hole at 1:45. The séance, her masterstroke, begins at midnight. Salt snow, sliced cord, Liesel drugged with cocoa to speak in hollow tones, all to paint the nurse as sleepwalking killer. He turned to Liesel. The girl's face was pale but steady. The Edelweiss sprig lay crushed on the piano lid. Ma petite, you were the perfect shadow. Your boots, your sheet, your nightmares. Madame borrowed them all. She burned her file, Desmarais, planted fragments spelling Obermeyer. The dosage note forged in her hand, the séance to establish your trance. But the little grey cells noticed the stride too long, the lipstick too vivid, the perfume too expensive for a nurse's cocoa. Madame Desmarais laughed. Dry, cracked final. You think you've won, little man. Spring will come, the gendarmes will come, and I will buy them all. Poirot's eyes glinted. No, madame, you mistake the currency of truth. It cannot be bought with diamonds. He lifted the necklace, let it spill through his fingers like frozen water. The Étoile de Lion, stolen 1919, recovered by Varnholt, to be worn by you at the Boxing Day revelation, then returned to its rightful owner. Your empire, built on this lie, would have crumbled. Your son, claimed as the doctor's heir, taken from the life you forged. You killed to keep both. He placed the necklace atop the silk sheet. Motive, maternal love, poisoned into empire. Method, scopolamine, suggestion, snow, opportunity, the priest hole, the avalanche, the séance. Blake stirred. And the child? Poirot produced the final photograph. The boy of 15, dark eyes, Clotilda's mouth. Safe in Paris, raised as the son of a patron. He will never know his father's name, nor his mother's crime. That is mercy. Keller closed his notebook with a snap. Confession is complete. Madame Desmarais rose slowly, chinchilla trailing like a bridal train of ash. She crossed to the French windows, pressed her palms to the glass. Beyond, the snowfields glimmered under starlight, endless, pitiless. I dragged him smiling into the dark, she whispered, for my son, for my name, for the lie I lived. She turned. Tears had cut channels through the powder on her cheeks. Lock me in the pantry with him. Let the cold take me too. Poirot's voice was gentle. No, madame. You will live, with the truth. Spring will melt the sheep back pass. The gendarmes will come. You will stand trial in Berne, in the full glare of the press you once commanded. Your gowns will be worn by prisoners. Your diamonds will fund the orphanage that houses the child you feared to lose. He gestured to Blake. The captain produced handcuffs, borrowed from the valet's theatrical props, but steel nonetheless. Madame Desmarais extended her wrists without resistance. The click of the cuffs echoed like a gavel. Liesel stood. My file, my inheritance. Poirot opened the safe, withdrew the intact Obermeyer dossier. Here, Varnholt's endorsement revoked, posthumously meaningless. Your father's sanitarium is yours. The little grey cells suggest you sell it. Fund a clinic for those he harmed. Begin again without nightmares. Liesel took the file, pressed it to her heart. "And you, monsieur?" Poirot twirled his moustache. "I return to London when the snows melt. Another case, another impossible crime. But tonight," he surveyed the room, the evidence, the faces. "Tonight, order is restored." He crossed to the hearth, added a log. Flames leapt, painting the walls gold. The avalanche sealed the pass, but truth is a chisel. It cuts through ice. Blake poured whiskey. 4 glasses, not 5. He raised his. "To Hercule Poirot." Keller lifted his. "To order." Liesel raised hers. Water, clear as absolution. To Waking. They drank. Madame de Marais remained at the window, cuffed, staring at the mountain that had become her mirror. Poirot set his glass down, untouched. "The impossible has occurred. Again. A locked room, footprints to nowhere, a frozen smile, all explained by silk, snow, and a mother's love turned lethal." He moved to the French windows, opened them. Cold rushed in, sharp as forgiveness. The balcony was pristine, the drift where the chinchilla lay, now a smooth mound. He stepped outside, breathed the crystalline air. Behind him, the chalet glowed, a lantern in the void. Inside, Blake secured Madame de Marais in the pantry beside the corpse. The door closed. The key turned. Silence fell, broken only by the fire's murmur and the mountain's distant creak. Poirot lingered on the balcony. Stars wheeled overhead, cold, eternal, indifferent. He addressed the night. "You see, Hastings, if you are here, the psychology is simple. A woman builds an empire on a stolen stone. A man threatens to shatter it with a child. Silk and snow become her weapons. But she forgets. The little grey cells do not forget." He closed the windows, latched them. The chalet settled into sleep, or the nearest thing to it with a murderess in the pantry and justice waiting for spring. At midnight, the fire burned low. Poirot sat alone, the silk sheet across his lap, tracing the monogram L.O. with a gloved finger. "Order and method," he murmured, "always order and method." Outside, the mountain gleamed crimson in the moon's first light. Blood on snow, soon to melt. Inside, the case was closed, the killer named, the truth colder than the grave. And Hercule Poirot, moustaches bristling like twin icicles, allowed himself the smallest of smiles. The impossible had been explained. The snow could keep its secrets no longer.